Welcome to this week's Question Time, which comes from Boston in Lincolnshire, the town which recorded the highest Brexit vote in the UK. Now, on our panel tonight, we have the Conservative International Development Secretary, Priti Patel, Labour's Shadow Justice Secretary, Richard Bergen, UKIP's MEP, spokesman on migration, Stephen Woolfe, the playwright and novelist Bonnie Greer, who once wrote an opera about being on Question Time, and the columnist for The Sun and The Spectator, Rod Liddle. Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to have Richard Bergen here. He replaces Emily Thornberry, Shadow Foreign Secretary, who was going to be here but has gone to Israel for Shimon Peres's funeral. Now, remember, as ever, you can join in this debate as it gets going on Facebook, on Twitter, or you can text us on 83981, and do get involved. A question to start with from Alex Law, please. Mr. Law.
Is Jeremy Corbyn out of touch with communities like Boston on the subject of unlimited immigration?
Jeremy Corbyn, who said famously we need to maintain free movement across our borders, is he out of touch with communities like where we are here in Boston? Rod Liddle.
Well, yes, he is, of course. 78.1% voted in Boston to leave the European Union, and immigration was a substantial part of that reason. And, of course, 70% of the population, we know from opinion polls, are opposed or want more controls on immigration, and more than 50% want immigration stopped entirely. So, yes, of course he's out of touch. I mean, bless the bloke, he's not just out of touch on immigration, if we're absolutely honest. And it's not just Jeremy. I mean, if you looked at the Labour Party conference this week, you know, and I watched it with despair as that mountain of hypocrisy and self-regard, Diane Abbott, stood up and said that anyone who voted, the people who voted for Brexit, were bigots and didn't like the look of foreign people. You're meant to be reaching out to new voters. That's 52% of the electorate, Diane, who aren't going to vote for you. All right? 52% you've labelled bigots. And then Shami Chakrabarti gets up and says, oh, don't leave me alone in this country with Essex man. And the snobbery and disdain and loathing that the London left in the Labour Party has for ordinary working people is remarkable. The party that was once the party of the working class.
Richard Bergen.
Now, I am on the left. I'm not from London. I'm from Leeds. I do believe that it's really important that people in Westminster don't patronise people in Boston or anywhere else. So I am totally resistant to any idea of the Westminster elite trying to wriggle out of the message that the British people sent in the European Union referendum. On the subject of immigration, I think we have to understand it's not as simple as sometimes some of the newspapers make out. Immigration can be separated into asylum seekers that we have a duty to assist, fleeing death, torture and persecution, immigrants who wish to stay here for the rest of their lives, and then the free movement of labour under the European Union. Jeremy Corbyn, in his conference speech, did address these issues. And what some people forget is when Jeremy Corbyn said in his speech, and he said it before, that he's very concerned about the free movement of labour being used by unscrupulous employers to undercut pay terms and conditions. Tony Blair didn't say much about that. No. Gordon Brown didn't say much about that. So he is alert to that. And also, the Conservative government abolished the Migration Impact Fund, which was meant to help areas like Boston that have a large share of immigrants coming to it. And Labour, as Jeremy said in his speech the other day, will restore the Migration Impact Fund. So I actually think Jeremy's more alert to this. And one last thing I'll say on this issue.
You think he's in tune with Boston?
Well, that's for the people of Boston to decide at the next general election. It's not for me to speak for Boston. But I believe in the bread and butter issues of needing more council houses, needing more affordable homes, needing a real living wage that is meaningful, needing a situation where your children and grandchildren go to university without being saddled with £30,000 of debt and more. I think he is in touch on those bread and butter issues.
You said...
I completely agree with what the gentleman on the right said. I don't know your name.
Rob Liddell, this one?
Not the Labour one.
Richard.
The one on the right, over...
Me?
Yes, you.
Controversial.
I completely agree. You mentioned the word about hypocrisy. This is a common theme with leftists, very hypocritical people. If they'll espouse, you've got to be tolerant. You've got to be very tolerant towards everyone. But and tolerant towards people's views. But if they disagree with your views, they're very intolerant towards your own views.
Incredibly intolerant.
I would term. I'm very interested in this. The psychology behind it. With leftists, I would term it under the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I would include. Socialist delusional disorder. I would put it in the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Disorders. Because the hypocrisy is unbelievable from a lot of people.
Can I respond on that?
From the left side.
All right, socialist disillusionment.
Socialist
Delusional disorder. Go on.
With respect, it does rather sound like a caricature of the Stalinist Soviet Union, where people with the wrong political beliefs are being carted away and you've diagnosed as being politically or medically suspect. So I do take objection to that.
Yeah, well, you will, because you're Labour, aren't you?
OK, Stephen Stephen
Couldn't have expressed it any better than myself. The thing about Corbyn is I respect the man for having opinions of views of his own and challenging those within his own party to lead that party. But on this particular issue, all I can say about him is that he is reckless, he's irresponsible, and he is selfish. He's selfish for a man to say that I am relaxed about the numbers of migrants in this country, and I'm not concerned about the numbers whatsoever. It's easy to be relaxed if you live in £1 million house in a nice, comfortable zone in London. It's easy to be relaxed if you have a salary provided by you in this audience. It's easy to be relaxed if you're going to have a pension that most people in this country would dream about, whilst here at the Pilgrims Hospital you're having to queue into the early hours to get seen, where you've got 4,000 new houses having to be built to command the numbers of people having to come here, why you've got the rising crime in this area, why people can't get into schools. All the same sort of things, Richard, you and I agree need to be dealt with. And you cannot deal with immigration in this country to create an ethical, fair migration policy without a visa system that controls the numbers of people coming into this country, because you will never know what services you have. You will never know. You will never know how much money you are needed to provide for those services, and you will never know how much the migration fund that you require if you can't get a grip of that first.
But without immigration, you can't maintain our NHS either.
Now, that is where you come into a very dignified point, and I accept that. Everybody in this audience, including our party, and if you read my policy, have made it clear migration into this country is necessary and important. All we have ever simply said is we must not have uncontrolled mass migration because it pushes down wages.
All right, Stephen, thank you. Look. We'll hear from one or two more members of our audience. Then we're gone. Yes.
The Labour MP said that Jeremy Corbyn wants to listen to the British people. But he's not actually listening to the PLP, who are, in fact, elected by the British people. Right now, he's talking about deselecting them, or other people who are supporting him are talking about deselecting them. That doesn't sound to me like he's listening to anybody apart from himself and the 330-odd people that are part of the membership. I don't know.
So the elected MPs are not ruling Labour's roost, is what you're really saying. Let's hold that point for a moment. Let me just hear from one or two other people. You in the middle with spectacles on.
Mr. Woolfe, you just asked about how Jeremy Corbyn finds it easy to relax while he's sitting in a luxury house in London, not worrying about immigration. It's also easy for us to relax when we have immigrants who have come over here because of uncontrolled immigration, who are doing the work in the fields that we don't want to do. If we were to cut immigration and cut uncontrolled immigration, then those fields would be empty and we wouldn't have the economy in Boston that we do.
And that's absolutely not.
No, that's not right, because the wages might, if you've seen the hideous exploitation which there's been of these migrant workers coming over here, there was a horrible case in the paper yesterday of people being paid virtually nothing and living in appalling accommodation. British workers will not put up with that, and they shouldn't.
Exactly. You, sir. You, sir.
I had a discussion on local radio recently where it was suggested that Lincolnshire councils are not doing enough to help and rehome, etc., Syrian refugees. What they also suggested that we, the people of Lincolnshire in this room, should take them into our houses. You don't know who you're going to get. I'm not saying they're all murderers or terrorists or whatever, but you've no background checks on some of these people. We just don't know who we're going to get. But to take them to say, well, take them in your houses. I wonder if the people who are actually saying this and organising this...
They're not saying you're being asked to, to invite them in.
David, no, you don't have to do it.
You have to do it, so you
could do it.
You could make a check.
Ask them to do it, and,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable.
All right, Priti Patel.
Well, look, I mean, let me start by answering the question that was put, first of all. In terms of Jeremy Corbyn, I take the view pretty clearly that he is not listening to the voices of people here in Boston or the electorate that voted very clearly to take back control of our borders and our immigration policy. And I think what we have seen recently, even people in his own party, there are Labour MPs who during the referendum campaign were saying that the Labour Party needs to be more in tune with people out and about across the country. And I think it's a terrible reflection, actually, of Jeremy Corbyn, that he still wants to espouse free movement, that he's in denial in terms of what the British public have said and have voted for, not just in the referendum, but also he will not acknowledge the failure of successive Labour governments when it comes to free movement, the lack of transitional controls when Eastern European countries were joining the European Union, when accession states were joining Europe, and the fact, quite frankly, that when it came to access to public services, they were in utter denial about the pressure that uncontrolled immigration was putting on our public services.
But you don't have much of a record on it. You presided over the highest rise in immigration. No,
I think
the Tory
we do.
government net migration is currently at 327,000 a year. I think it's the highest it's ever been.
David, there are 2 points I'd like to make.
Answer that point
first. In the
first.
last 6 years, we have taken measures. In fact, there's been legislation to stop people from Europe coming to exploit, for example, the benefit system.
So how come it's at the highest level?
And also
third highest, I think.
But they're not here to take benefits. They're here to work.
These are just measures that we've taken.
And why did you abolish the migration impact fund?
The other point to make, of course, is that, this is a complex issue and there is no silver bullet. You're not going to control numbers overnight. And I think we should all be responsible here as politicians and actually acknowledge that. There is more that needs to be done. And, of course, the government will continue to work to get numbers down. And there is, of course, the other issue. Our focus is that we can commit that once we have left the European Union, we'll be able to take control from the European Union of the people that will be coming here. And that is our focus now in government when it comes to immigration.
OK. You thought it would work. We'll see whether it does. The woman there on the right, and then I'll come to you, Bonnie.
Yeah, immigration in Boston, it's happened. Boston is a very, very big town now. We can't send people back. We're breeding all the time from whatever corner of the town. What we need to do, we need to invest heavily on the frontline services, A&E, EMAS, the police, because we're struggling so much. We really need to put some money into those services. It's happened, immigration, you can count numbers all over the place. It's happened.
So, from your point of view, is Jeremy Corbyn out of touch, or are you saying that the things that Richard Bergen said are the right reaction?
Yeah, completely out of touch. Completely out of touch.
Completely out of touch.
Yeah.
But it's the Conservative government that are hell-bent on making cuts to public services in places like Boston and across the country. And we do need an end to austerity and cuts, because that's causing real problems for working-class people in Boston and everywhere else too.
But Richard, it was your government that let people come in without any provision for public services and didn't even acknowledge the type of numbers that were coming in.
I'm not a politician, and I'm the only immigrant on this panel. So I'm not going to come up with any policy stuff. I don't know all of this. It seems to me, looking at it, that first of all, this town and maybe this region has been left on its own. I don't understand why. I don't understand why. And I think it has to do with both parties, or maybe three parties. I don't understand why that's happened. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we all know that we live in an aging society. Our country, this country, and I'm a citizen of this country, so I say our, is getting older. And if we look at the example of Japan right now, which has very little immigration, the Japanese economy is in deep trouble because they're not replacing human beings. So there's an economic argument for immigration. I don't know how you want to do it, how you want to make it work, but you need folks in here because the country is getting older.
That's unsustainable, Bonnie.
No, it is.
You can't,
listen,
you can't just keep bringing young people in every few years.
I didn't give an answer. I'm telling you a reality. That is a reality. Now, it would seem to me that any party in charge has to look at the reality, the economic base and future of the country, and the fact that we're going to have an enormous amount of pensioners who will not be able to be taken care of. But the third thing I want to say, and this is a harsh thing to say, but it's the truth. We're a migratory species, we human beings, and we move. We move to better ourselves. We move to go and find things we need. We've always moved. We will continue to move. This town of Boston is the second Boston I've been in. The first one is in Massachusetts, and people from your town founded that town. And they founded it because they wanted to have a better life. And they moved. And Boston, and listen, I'm not being flippant about this. I respect everything you're saying. But I think we need to move away from these political, because the political parties, particularly the Conservative Party, which has actually had a mano within itself for the last maybe 20 years over Europe, and now UKIP is eating their lunch, basically, is a lot of what is happening here as well. But your town and your concerns need to be addressed, and we also have to understand the realities of human movement and the fact that we're in the biggest surge of humanity since the Second World War.
And just to go back to what Jeremy Corbyn said, we need to maintain free movement. Do you agree with that, or do you think that on that particular point, Jeremy Corbyn is out of touch with the opinions of people who, for instance, who voted Brexit, a large number of whom
Well,
are here in
I
Boston?
think, you know, I'm a passionate Remainer, but I believe in the people have spoken. And if the people have spoken, the people's will must be done.
Yeah.
However, and I'm not a Corbynista or whatever that is, but I want to say that it seems to me that a leader is also someone who has an idea about something, a vision about something. This is Jeremy Corbyn's idea. Now, if he's out of touch with you, that's another point. That's work he has to do. But he has the right, and we demand that he has an idea of this country and what it should do. Freedom of movement, if we are going to have any sort of relationship with the rest of the world, particularly with Europe, has to be something that's thought about.
Thank you very much. You in the back there.
I'd like to
yes.
agree with the lady at the back there and Richard. Jeremy Corbyn's government would be the only government to invest in communities and put money into areas where there has been high levels of migration. He'd invest in that. I can't see a Tory government investing and putting money into the public services that people need.
All right, and the woman in the front row here. You. Yes?
The only people to blame for this is the government. Where did they expect all these migrants coming over? Where were they going to put them? I've got grown-up children. They can't get a place, a council place. My daughter was actually told, come back to this 10, 15 years. The school, this went back well over 10 years ago. My daughter couldn't go to the local school because there was an high influx of migrants. So she had to go about 18 miles away. I had to pay £5.60 a day for her to go to that school when her local school was 2-3 minutes round the corner. But because, and what I'm trying to say, 10 years ago, they knew about this, and 10 years on, where do you put these people?
All right.
They never did nothing.
Priti Patel. No, I come to
Well,
Priti Patel.
I think this comes to the point that over a period of time, previous governments simply failed to acknowledge, and these were Labour governments as well.
These governments, you all say the same. No matter who gets in power, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And then the next one in power, they say, get us in.
Well, let me just say, first of all...
You don't do nothing whatsoever.
Well, in terms of controlling immigration, there was uncontrolled immigration under Labour, and I think actually Richard needs to acknowledge...
There still is, Priti.
But also, in terms of transitional controls, there were no transitional controls under Labour, and as Conservatives we put them in. But the reality is, and you've just highlighted this yourself, people came in, there were no controls, and that amounted to successive pressure on public services. And so the point is, politicians are now responding to, quite rightly, the anxieties and the concerns and the real strain and pressure that we are seeing across the country. And I was out during the referendum campaign, every day travelling the country, and this was the #1 issue that came up in terms of pressures on public services and how communities felt disenfranchised from the political leaders in Westminster who they quite categorically said were doing nothing about addressing these concerns. So going back to Labour, this just shows how out of touch Labour are, how out of touch Jeremy Corbyn is, but also the fact is we've had the referendum, we are committed now in government to get on and do the right thing and deliver Brexit and get on with the immigration.
We have to wait for you to decide when we leave.
Okay, we'll come to that question in just a second. I want to go to the woman on the woman on the right there. No, you've spoken already. I'm going to the woman up there, in the third row from the back. Yeah, third row.
Eric Pickles axed the Migration Impact Fund in 2010, and the Tory party has been complacent about levels of immigration ever since, and they've just been completely complacent.
Okay, Rod, you want to come in, and then we'll move on to the next question.
My point was just addressing the original question: is Jeremy out of touch? He is at, and think of it, 26% Labour is in the opinion polls at the moment. That's below Michael Foot in the 1983 general election, meant to be the nadir of all Labour performances.
Out of touch doesn't mean he's wrong, Rod. This man...
Hang on, just let me finish. When Labour was actually up against a woman, a Prime Minister who'd won a popular war and a credible opposition in the SDP as well, at 26%, and with a popularity rating and an approval rating of -100. Even I struggle to get that.
This town is asking...
All right. Let me bring Labour in on this.
And the bubble gets smaller and smaller, and they wrap themselves in it, and they don't give a monkey's what people
Richard
outside
Bergen,
that bubble think.
Richard Bergen, you are I'm going to go... Well, when we've had an answer from him, I'm going to go on because we want to talk about Brexit, but just on Corbyn and on what Rodney has said.
Well, in Jeremy Corbyn's speech at the party conference in Liverpool the other day, he did say that we have an electoral mountain to climb, and the opinion polls that Rod has outlined show that that's the case. But I think one of the main reasons for those opinion polls are the last 3 months of an unnecessary leadership election. It's time for Labour to look outward, take the fight to the Conservatives. It's also time on this whole issue of austerity, this whole issue of cuts and lack of houses, lack of services, to hold the government to account for their political choice of making everyone in this audience pay the price for a bankers' crisis in 2008 that they didn't cause. It's always someone else's fault. It's always someone else's fault than the government's that there isn't enough council houses. It's always someone else's fault than the government's that there aren't enough jobs. Perhaps it's the government's fault. Perhaps it's their fault for making you all pay the price for a crisis that you didn't cause.
All right. Thank you. Now, we're going to go on to another question, but just before we do, Neath in South Wales is going to have a visitation from Question Time next week, and Hendon in North London the week after that. I'll give the details of how to apply at the end of the programme again, but if you have a look on the screen there, if you'd like to come to Neath or Hendon and have your say, that's how to do it. I want a question, please, from Martin Bontoft. Martin Bontoft.
Isn't it time that this government stopped dithering over Brexit?
Which is what you feel they're doing, presumably.
Yes, I mean, I think we're at a stage where we need some very strong leadership, as much so in my lifetime as any other time.
Stephen Woolfe.
The government has to move rapidly, effectively, to ensure that the will of the people is complete. And what the will of the people is that we leave Brexit. I hear these arguments that the 48% versus the 52%. Well, here in Boston, you were the 76.5%. And in many of the towns that I campaigned across the north of England, from Stoke to Lichfield to Blackpool to Bury, all of those towns voted in huge numbers for a decisive action that we take back control of our laws completely, that we take back control of our borders completely, that we get control of our fisheries, and that we stop spending the money that we have week in, week out, which will continue to be spent until we leave this sclerotic project. And that is why we need to move exceedingly rapidly.
But exceedingly rapidly is one thing. Do you think the government is actually dithering? Is your view that it could have done more sooner?
Look, I've opened my mind to this a little bit.
What does that mean?
And what I meant by it is that, you know, all of our parties, including our own, have had these election processes going on. I've seen that Theresa May has put in Liam Fox and David Davis into significant positions, and people do have to listen to the arguments about how we achieve the ultimate goal of ensuring that we get Brexit. There's no hard Brexit. There's no soft Brexit. It's just simple. It's Brexit. And we're here to make sure that happens.
That's what the Prime Minister says. There's no difference between soft and hard, in your view?
No, there isn't. Because quite clearly the arguments were that those 4 points that I talked about, control of our money, control of our borders, control of our fisheries, and ensuring that we stop spending our money and make sure, as we talked about, Richard, that that money comes back into the coffers of the UK, the billions that are currently being spent on projects across Europe, to ensure that we do have the funds. Because when we talk about the economics of the Labour Party, it's in fantasy world. When you have nearly 4 million people come into this country in 10 to 11 years, when you have, as we looked here in Boston, the costs are in their hundreds of billions, not the 50 or 100 million that are proposed. Yeah. And when we leave the European Union, when we leave, that is the time that we'll be able to take that money back, controlled into our pocket, and spent on the services that this town and hundreds of towns and cities across this country need.
Well, we know what the various parties' policies are, but what the question Martin's asking is about whether the government's dithering. And Priti Patel, I put to you what Ken Clarke said today. Nobody in this government has the first idea of what they're going to do next on the Brexit front.
Exactly. Well,
that's Ken Clarke, much admired. I know he was a Remainer, but much admired for his observations on politics. What do you say to that?
Well, I have pure respect for Ken, but we have a plan, and our plan is to make a success of Brexit. This is a unique opportunity for us. It is a golden opportunity for us now when it comes to looking to the future, being outward-looking, leaning out in terms of our place in the world. Stephen's already highlighted some of the key things in terms of money and what we will get back. But I think it's important to say a couple of things about negotiations. And it's wrong to say nothing is happening. You know, Theresa May has shown very, very clear leadership. She's set up 2 new government departments focused on leaving the European Union. This is not going to be a straightforward negotiation. We are in that process. She's leading on that. She's already started to speak to European Union leaders, and that is the right thing to do. And, of course, we have the machinery of government working on the details of our plan.
When will she decide when to implement Article 50?
Well,
or has she decided when to do it?
Well, she will, in due course, she will announce the details of that. But I think quite rightly so. You know, I've worked in business before, and when I've been out there negotiating, whether it's business deals and things of that nature, I'm not going to go out and put my cards on the table. And so we're not going to give a running commentary on
Martin,
this.
are you happy with this answer?
Well, the problem I have with this is it was put to the electorate quite simply, remain or leave. And it was as black and white as that. There were no grey areas at that time. It's only since then, since they got the answer that they probably didn't want and didn't expect, that the grey areas have come up, and it seems now that everybody's going to have lots of hot dinners negotiating round tables.
If I may,
you know, it's going to be an endless process.
Well,
I think we need to be incisive.
Well, it won't be, and I think it's important to say that the Prime Minister, and rightly so, and the government are focused on getting the best deal and the right deal for Britain. We are putting Britain's national interest first. That is the right thing to do following the result of the European Union. She's unequivocal when she has said Brexit means Brexit. There's no faffing about. We will deliver on that, and we will deliver the right deal for our country.
And is there any deadline on when Article 50 might be invoked, i.e. we say we're leaving and have the 2 years to negotiate?
I've already said we're not going to give a running commentary.
Well, I
on
know
this.
you're not going to give a running commentary. Is there no... I mean, next year, the year after, the year after that?
We are working on this. I mean, it's not indefinite. We will work to do this. And this isn't about how quickly, because you have to do this in the right...
Well, it is for him, because he wants action. He's not going to live long enough.
That's a bit harsh. You look perfectly well to me.
Bonnie Greer, I'll come to you. Bonnie Greer.
This audience and the rest of the people in this country are clever enough to know what was promised to them and what was implied in the vote, that this was going to happen. Now, the deal is, and I don't think you have to be in politics to understand this or know this, Matteo Renzi, who is Prime Minister of Italy, laid it out today. The fact is that Brexit is a result of the mano a mano that's been going on in the Conservative Party and the old referendum party that Pretty used to belong to for 20 years. David Cameron decided to put this thing out, put the referendum out here in order to outflank his right wing. And as that gentleman said, he got the wrong answer, and that's why he resigned. Now, bum, 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 you have a situation where you have people in court who are at the High Court to ask this question, which this government never dealt with. Does the Prime Minister have the right to use the royal prerogative to trigger Article 50? Now, the fact that the past Prime Minister didn't do that, didn't find out if she was able to do that, we don't even know. There's tons of things. We've got 2,000 pages of legislation. There's 40 years of legislation. You'll need 365 civil servants alone to administer this, but they didn't think of that because you guys were supposed to do this. You see, that's what it's about.
Okay, no, hold on. You've had no, wait. Richard, no, I'll come to you. I will come to you. Richard Morgan.
Well, firstly, to make it clear, Britain needs to leave the European Union because the British people decided to leave the European Union. No ifs, no buts. But what we need is a clear vision of what a Britain post-Brexit looks like. And I want to raise two issues.
And hang on, do you need that before you invoke Article 50?
Well, we want to hear from the government, and we haven't heard so far what kind of post-Brexit Britain they're proposing.
Go on. To be precise, you would like the government to say, we have now, this is what we're aiming at, and we will now invoke Article 50.
That's what the government should do. The government should make clear the post-Brexit Britain that they're negotiating. And there's two important
Even though people won't talk to them before they've done it.
There are two important areas that I want to raise. I don't know what employment law is going to look like post-European Union exit. I want the government to say they're going to keep the workers' rights that people in this country benefit from. And I have to say I don't trust the Conservative government on employment rights, partly because Pretty, and I have to mention this, did say once they enter the workplace, the British are amongst the worst idlers in the world.
She
said that in 2012.
OK, what's your second point?
And my second point, it's in a book that you co-authored, Britannia Unchained. My second point is on human rights. On this very show, 5 years ago, Pretty revealed her enthusiasm for bringing back the death penalty, even if it meant innocent people dying. So is it any wonder that people like myself don't trust the Conservatives, either with employment rights or with your human rights?
Penalty in the European Union.
I think we're slightly off the point, aren't we?
I think it's very important. I think it's very important. I think it's very important indeed. Employment rights and human rights need retaining.
Off the point.
The point is very important. Your party doesn't believe that Britain would be successful outside of the European Union.
I think we can be.
Rod Liddell, and then we'll come to members of the audience.
I think Bonnie was a little bit naughty, if I may say so.
That's all right.
It's all right. That having said, yes, you know, we had this vote, and it was a vote to leave, and therefore we must leave. And then to start bringing up this bizarre court action, whereby these remaining sulking Remainers totally unable to get over the fact that it's the same. Do you know what it is?
Stop playing to the gallery.
It's not playing to the gallery.
It is playing to the gallery because we are a nation under the rule of law.
I'm aware we're a nation,
now,
Bonnie. Thank
hang on.
you.
If somebody wants to go to law, to ask a question.
We
You're going to
voted
disparage
to
them.
leave the European Union. It is absolutely clear. It's increasingly clear. Hang on a minute. Let me speak for a second. It's increasingly clear to the Remainers, who are increasingly of a view that we should never have another vote and that Article 50 should be triggered. Now, as it happens, I don't agree with this gentleman. I think that the government isn't doing a bad job on Article 50 at the moment. I want the government to work so that Britain gets the best possible deal out of leaving the EU. And secondly, and if that takes a few years, I don't mind that. And imagine how much better our position will be if, for example, France votes to leave the EU, which is entirely possible within the next year or 2 years. So I have no problem with the government's policy at the moment.
You don't seriously believe that a vote of the people of this country who decided to leave the European Union should be decided by a judge in chambers?
No.
That it's his decision over the people of this country.
Hang on.
Unelected body of the House of Lords
he's not asked
should
to decide
hold up
it.
legislation to stop it.
He's being asked, as I understand
asked
it,
a question.
to say whether Parliament... Ken Clarke, go back to Ken Clarke. He said, I think his words were, I'm not going to be told how to vote by an opinion poll. Meaning the referendum.
Ken Clarke is seeking to get the Legion of Honour of France by keeping us in the European Union.
Let me go back. I am not somebody who thinks that there should be a second referendum. That's wrong. That's wrong. But we are a nation of laws. It is okay to go to law, to ask a question. Do we make a decision like this by plebiscite, or do we go back to our representative democracy? It is a question. And to imply or even to state that it's wrong for someone to want to go to court to ask the question of our nationality.
So you don't want a second referendum, you just want to say, let's not do it.
All right, let's go back. Let's leave the law courts for a moment. Go to the woman up there, assuming you're not part of the legal profession, madam.
I just wanted to come back to something that Pretty said. I appreciate negotiations really important and getting your ducks in a row. I'm a procurement manager. I negotiate day in, day out. But what I really want to know is when the government are going to stop negotiating with people's lives and futures and guarantee the right to remain for those that have been here a long time and have lives and families.
The guarantee of the right to remain.
Well, we've been clear, the Prime Minister has been clear that, of course, nothing changes until we leave the European Union, and she is working to give that guarantee, and she has said that categorically.
There are some things you don't negotiate on, though.
The man at the very back there. You, sir, in the middle.
I'd say making a success of Brexit is not really a policy position, is it? I agree with the member for UKIP that the money we send to Europe would be better spent in the likes of the NHS and that. But it still doesn't really solve the problems we have. Why doesn't anyone from any party really look at the likes of Bernie Sanders, who suggested taxing at a fraction of 1% the speculative trading and raise hundreds of billions a year?
Okay. I think we've done a fair half hour or more about Brexit and about immigration. I'm going to go on to another question. No, I'm going to go to another question. I'm going to another question. No, hold on. You've had a big say already. I'm just moving on. I know you've got a lot to say, but a lot of people have a lot to say, mainly around this panel. All right. I'm going to take a question. OK. I'm going to take a question from Sue Selby, please.
Will football ever be free of corruption and greed and return to being a true sport?
When will football be free of corruption and greed and return to being a true sport? Bonnie Greer. You know all about that.
I know all about it.
No?
Yeah, as someone born in America, it is quite amazing how much money is in football, and I'm learning about it. I'm learning about the sport. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I'll tell you one thing. The amount of money that supporters pay and what they get in return, I think it's scandalous.
Absolutely.
I don't know how.
Okay.
I don't know. Someone getting $350,000 a week. I don't get that, and I don't quite understand why the supporters, and I'm saying this with respect, But I don't understand why the supporters haven't had some sort of revolt about this, because it's outrageous. Really.
OK, let's be brief on this one, because I've got another question I want to come to, Priti Patel.
Well, I think what we've seen this week is, it's shameful. Shameful beyond all belief, it really is. So obviously, whoever now comes in as the New England manager in particular, they're going to have to really raise their standards. I think the FA in particular need to look to themselves, look to their practices and actually say, enough is enough. I think it's just atrocious what we've seen, but clearly there's a long way to go because of the excessive pay that exists in football, because of the excessive fees that are associated with the transfer of footballers with players. And quite frankly, it's a sport that is dominated by money, and nothing's going to change that overnight. It really isn't. So this will now be about ethics and standards and making sure that those that are at the top of the game in football are transparent and are good, strong role models.
OK. Richard Bergen.
Back when football was cleaner than clean and whiter than white, Leeds United were the best team in Britain. And in the 60s and 70s, but on a serious note, I agree with Priti on this issue. I think that football has been ruined by big money. I was born in 1980. I remember the time before the Premier League, and I think football has been ruined by big business, market forces, and fans being ripped off, and working-class loyalties being taken for granted and exploited by big business. And actually, it mirrors, doesn't it, other aspects of our society. Irresponsibility at the top, where people are bending the rules for an extra buck when they're the people who really don't need any money whatsoever.
OK. You, sir. Yeah, go on then.
It's reassuring to hear politicians talk in that way, because they've never ever taken money, have they, or taken things they shouldn't have taken. So I think it's rather patronising again. And where would they rather the money went? Into the boardroom? Should that sponsorship and that income go to the elite and not the workers?
Paying less for a season ticket, and should be paying less to get into a match, and shouldn't be subsidising people to accumulate £500,000 in wages per week. I think it's obscene.
In the last 15 years, the fans have been edged out of the game in the Premier League. I mean, it is now impossible, if you're a working-class bloke, to afford a season ticket at Arsenal, take your kids. You can't do it. The whole thing has been ruined. As Bonnie says absolutely right, it is ruined by greed, and Priti said the same thing. Did you know that the taxpayer gives the Football Association £30 million a year? It's just, I found that out recently. This is bizarre. I mean, it's like giving £30 million, the taxpayer giving £30 million to Philip Green. I mean, it's just absurd. And it is an appalling sight. And the England team, not that anyone gives a monkeys who manages the England team anymore. I'd probably go for Anjem Chowdhury, frankly. It is a grotesque example. And if it
will it ever be free, was the question of corruption, or is it like that forever?
It won't be free. And more of this will happen. But if you want to see good football, go down a few divisions. Yeah, the prices are better, and there's more fun, and you can mix with other fans.
Stephen Woolfe. Stephen Woolfe, and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
Stephen.
I love football. I played semi-professionally till I was 35. I've got the bow legs in my knees that can probably put a football right through my... And last time I was on Question Time, we were at Bolton, where my brother, Nathan Woolfe, had actually played for the club there. And he was brought in by Sam Allardyce, but I never saw anyone, nor did he, in terms of this at all. What has happened in this scandal has shown what is ultimately wrong about the modern game of football, and it is a time that we should look at this extensively and say enough is enough. The fans have been pushed out. The teams have become multimillionaires surrounding by themselves, and I am actually sickened, and I was one of those. I used to go to the paddock at Manchester United up against the... And if you think that Leeds were a clean club in the 70s under Evie, the tackles that used to go in there were extensive.
Let's not reminisce too much.
What I am saying here, what is even sickening about this is the fact that the man has brought our country into disrepute, is given £1 million, can go on holiday to think about his future. How many of us would receive that money if we brought our country in? What I would say to him is bring that £1 million back and put it into some sort of scheme that helps bring children together. That's where your £1 million should be.
Andrew Sherwin, let's have your question, please.
The Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition both benefited from a grammar school education, particularly in terms of social mobility. Why can't more low-income children with ability also benefit?
Richard Bergen.
Well, I'm against the Conservatives' plan on this, so maybe I disagree, I think, with Andrew on this particular question. I don't think we want to go back to a 1950s-style world of education and segregation where young children are called failures or successes at the age of 11. It does scar some people for life. And the evidence shows that grammar schools actually don't increase social mobility whatsoever. I think we really need an education policy so that everyone gets a good quality of education and so they're not separating our young people off. What kind of message would it send to your children if you're saying you're not allowed to go to this school with your friends because you didn't pass this exam? I think it's deeply, deeply divisive. And I don't think it's that popular amongst Conservative MPs either. So I think it's a real failure of judgment on the Prime Minister's part to bring this policy forward.
Andrew, do you want to reply to that?
Right, and I think arguing about grammar schools in terms of what happened in the 1950s is a bit like arguing about what happened in the football in this country in the 1950s and 60s. I think that's rather irrelevant. If you look at what grammar schools can offer now in terms of access into higher education, social mobility, it is there. The problem is that not enough children from lower economic backgrounds get access into grammar schools. That's why there isn't the social mobility that you're talking about.
One of the reasons it's not social mobility is because it bankrupts people to go to university. So we need to bring back student grants, for example.
Come back to grammar schools. Stick with that. Priti Patel.
Look, I think we need to look at this in the wider context of schools and, you know, much of what we've been doing over the last 6 years, getting more children into good and outstanding schools. That is the right thing to do. That's been a big focus for our government. And as a result, there are now 1.4 million more children in good or outstanding schools. But the reality is there are something like 1.25 million children that don't have access to a good or outstanding school place. Yeah. And rightly so, we are saying that the selective school system, grammar schools or faith schools, should actually be part of that provision. They should have the opportunity to now to work with other schools that are underperforming to create more good and outstanding school places, and that's across the country. And that means new, diverse ways of working, new partnerships. And to Richard's point, this isn't about going back to the 1950s. We're not going back to a binary system that existed previously of, you know, failure or, you know, selection in that sort of very crude term. This is about a new approach to education, one that gives more parental choice, one that also puts head teachers back into control where they can actually work with neighbouring schools. And I say this as someone that has been a governor of a grammar school in Essex, where we have a very proud tradition of grammar schools, but also grammar schools that work within the community and actually work with other local schools to create exactly that, good and outstanding school places for children of disadvantaged backgrounds. And I think that is commendable, and we should have more of that.
The man on the left there at the back. Yes.
I've been a governor of both a grammar school and a secondary school here in Lincolnshire. We have this system. We have the 11+. I think it's a very successful system. My children have been through it. And the one issue that worries me about...
When you say your children have been through it, do they come out all right the other side?
Yes, I think so. I hope they do as well, but I think so. The one issue which concerns me about this is the whole issue of the 11+, and how it is positioned as a pass and fail. And we need to sort that out. We need to go, if we go back to the 1960s and 70s, it was much more of you were academically qualified or you're vocationally qualified. And I would like to see that as more of a fork in the road as opposed to a pass and fail.
Rodman?
I think I'd agree with that 100%. I'm in favour of selection in some form. I'd rather have a comprehensive school which was rigorously streamed, if I'm absolutely honest. But I don't trust the comprehensive schools at the moment, the way that they're being run, to do that rigorous streaming and to value the very top. I do feel a bit misted by nostalgia about the 50s and 60s because it was a time of social mobility, and grammar schools did play into that. Even though many working class kids got stuck in a secondary modern which wasn't a very good school. Some got through, more than they do now.
Yes.
However, I also live in a county where there are grammar schools, and I am in absolute agreement with Richard that it does not facilitate social mobility now. It makes it much, much worse. There is no question there are more private schools as a consequence. It tends to be the most affluent kids who get into those grammar schools because the parents have the money to get the tutors to get them into private schools before that. Absolutely no question about it. So I'm in favour of selection, but I don't agree with 11 plus at all.
The woman up there, and then I'll come to you. Yes.
I went to a grammar school, and my husband works at the grammar school, the boys' grammar school here in Boston, and I'm very pro-grammar school. But I want to know, what are the Conservative Party going to do for those who aren't as academically minded? Where's the provision for them?
All right, well...
there used to be provision, the technical schools as well. It used to be a tripartite system, and that was a better idea.
Because there's no provision now, so if we're bringing in extra grammar schools, if there's no provision now, there's certainly not going to be any provision if we start dividing them up, is there?
Just briefly, Pretty.
Well,
and then
this is the point about having more for a diverse education system. This isn't just about having grammar schools. This is about growing the places, the number of good and outstanding school places, but importantly, giving children new opportunities. So vocational education has grown and grown over the last 6 years. You know, we have something like just under 3 million more people in apprenticeships as well. And that's what this is about, you know, having an education system that is diverse and actually that supports everyone of every ability so that they can get on in life. And I think that's incredibly important. This is my point. We're not going back to the 1950s. This is not the binary system that we had in the past.
So you're not going back to what David Cameron criticised when he was leading the opposition?
This is not...
When he said there's a kind of hopelessness about bringing back grammar schools.
No, this is not about recreating the old system.
Bonnie Greer, and now come to you, Steve.
I just make an immigrant's observation, if I may. It always fascinates me. It seems that the country is obsessed with selection. I don't understand it. Why can't everybody have access to top-level education in the most important language on the face of the earth, English? Why can't they have the best education possible in mathematics? Why can't everybody have that? Why can't it be? Why can't we also make teaching, which is one of the noblest things a human being can do, let's face it, put it at such a rank that not only that we support the teachers who are there, but we bring in the best people who want to teach. I think we need to build schools that everybody can go to, and then if you want to have selection, at some point, please not 11 years old, but at some point down the line, people can make a decision about what they want to do. But right now, we need children to learn to speak English. Everybody, not just immigrant children, but people born here.
You said in the second row.
I'm a former secondary maths school teacher. From what I observed in education, from teaching, each government decides to change it because they're on a sort of bandwagon. It doesn't matter whether it's a grammar school or the academy schools. Are you achieving standards? Now, Rod mentioned something very important earlier, streaming. I've taught in such schools, although it was called banding, and I have seen pupils, basically what happens is if you take the average size school, you've got, say, 6 sets in a year, you basically swap the top 2 sets around, so you've got mixed ability in pairs, if you're with me, and the weaker pupils are improved, achieve very good grades by the peer pressure. Mixed ability teaching, literally across the year, from what I could see, was a nightmare to try and teach. It does work. I don't believe in grammar schools. I went to a public school. Did it make a lot of difference to me? And I don't think it did.
Okay.
I'd rather have gone to a good, comprehensive school.
Stephen Woolfe.
For many families, particularly those on low incomes, poverty is a grinding chore that you have to go through when you're working long hours to provide for your family, pay the bills. Well, one of the things that keeps yourself hopeful is when you look at your children and say to them that you can actually give them a better life ahead of them. That the hope that you can give them education so that they can come here and sit on this platform, like so many of us, or get a good job as a teacher like you, sir. But for many in our country, as Rod has said, who've come off the council estates I've done, the social mobility has declined dramatically, not just because I said it. Organisations like the OECD, Arena ONS. There was huge amount of social mobility in the 1950s and 60s, and the grammar school system at that time wasn't perfect. And I made it clear that in UKIP's policies we had to ensure that we've got social mobility to move once more, and that's why I've been a huge backer of the grammar schools. It's helped me. I got out of my council estate. I became a lawyer. I was able to go to university. I sit here today very proud of my nation and very proud of the people who've made this nation and the ability. But what I have seen is social mobility decline in here. And I'm heartened by Theresa May's view that we don't go back to an education system of the 50s with segregation, that there is chances for people to come in at later stages, but more importantly, the funding is going across the whole country to many more schools to give them many more opportunities. And if I just raise this one final point. There is nothing wrong with selection. We've just had an amazing Olympics where our sports people are selected and taken off to training colleges.
We shouldn't have survival of the fittest in education.
No, hang on, Richard. When you talked about segregation in the 1950s, the only segregation in education in this country at the moment is you get into the best schools if you can afford to get into the best areas with the best money. And your government put that policy in place. Okay. And what I will say finally is we have to encourage other people who don't believe that they don't want to go to university. There are great talents in this country. Why is it that we can look at Germany and they have great technical colleges and believe in the engineers? If we're going to have this policy of grammar schools, we've got to have the technical colleges that go with it. We've got to have the colleges that work for sport. We've got to have those who work for engineers. We've got to make sure our education is for all, not those, and leave no one behind.
Okay. You said with the spectacles and the blue shirt. Yes.
I'd have to agree with Stephen and Rod on this. It's almost like there's some kind of stigma against segregation. Obviously, that sounds quite bad in a sense, but it's like if you're going to a grammar school like I do, for example, I think some kids have different aspirations for life, and it's like I think the state school system, at least from what I've seen, it's more focused on getting the D's to the C's rather than the B's to the A's or the A stars, and it's like people... It's just like, I think it works more efficiently if you specialise it in that manner.
Yes. Very briefly, Rod, do you agree with him?
I agree entirely. I think it's a huge problem. I mean, I do have a problem with the idea of the 11+. I think it's an iniquitous and very stressful exam and cruel, frankly, to separate
the 11+,
kids.
the 12+, the 13+, which is...
I mean, yes. Or you can do it through SATs tests, of course, which you can do.
OK. I'm sorry, our time's up. All the hands go down again. It's an hour we have, and we've used it. Next week, we're going to be in Neath in South Wales. The only person I know who's coming so far is Chuko Omuna, but maybe that'll be enough to bring in our audience. And the week after, we're going to be at Hendon in the Air Museum, I think, in North London. So come to Neath, come to Hendon. Go to the website. You can call the number 0330 123 9988. If you're hearing this on 5 Live, the debate, as you know, goes on Question Time, Extra Time. But here, it's my job to thank our panel very much indeed, and to thank all of you who came to Boston to take part. Until next week, next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
What a week it's been for politics on both sides of the Atlantic. Liz Kendall and Michael Portillo are on the panel, joining Andrew Neil next for This Week.